Welcome back to Serial Labyrinths, the channel where we walk the twisted paths of serial killers from around the world. I'm your host, Alberto Lopez. Tonight we venture into the vast, frozen highways of rural Russia to uncover the story of a man who blended into the ordinary, a truck driver, a family man, who may have left behind one of the darkest trails in modern Russian history. His name is Valeriy Andreev, known to investigators as the Orsk Maniac, a suspect in the disappearances and murders of dozens, possibly over 100 young women. Yet, after a catastrophic police mistake, he vanished into thin air. And more than a decade later, he remains one of Russia's most wanted fugitives. This is the story of the killer who got away, and a labyrinth of roads that still hide his secrets. Picture this: endless stretches of asphalt cutting through flat steppe and thick pine forests in Orenburg Oblast, where Europe quietly gives way to Asia. Towns like Orsk sit isolated, just kilometers from the Kazakhstan border. In villages such as Novosergeyevka, Kamenuzerny, Tospulak, and Mozarovka, life moves slowly. Public buses run irregularly, sometimes once every few hours, often not at all in bad weather. Young women, students heading to college in Orsk, workers returning from shifts, or just girls visiting friends, had few options. They stood on the roadside, thumb extended, hoping for a kind driver. In the summer, dust clouds rose from passing trucks. In winter, snowdrifts swallowed the shoulders, and temperatures plunged to -30°C or lower. Waiting too long meant frostbite, or worse. Hitchhiking wasn't a choice. It was necessity in these remote areas. From 2006 onward, a shadow fell over these roads. One by one, young women began vanishing. A girl waves down a ride near the Orenburg-Chelyabinsk highway, another near Samara-Orenburg. Last seen climbing into a truck or SUV, then nothing. Families reported them missing, but in small villages, police sometimes dismissed cases. She probably ran off with someone, or she'll turn up. Months, sometimes years, passed before grim discoveries. Mushroom foragers or road workers stumbled on remains in dense forest belts, skeletal, scattered by animals and weather. Signs pointed to severe assault before death, bodies left exposed to the elements. No immediate fingerprints or witnesses. The vast wilderness swallowed evidence quickly. Panic spread quietly. Locals whispered about organized gangs, trafficking rings smuggling women across the border, or even organ harvesting operations. Rumors grew in Orsk markets and village gatherings. It's not safe to hitch anymore. Some stopped traveling alone. But investigators, piecing together patterns from missing persons reports, reached a chilling conclusion. This wasn't a gang. It was likely one man, someone intimately familiar with these lonely highways. A driver who knew every turnoff, every hidden pullout in the woods, someone who could disappear into the traffic without raising suspicion. The fear was real. In a region where people rely on strangers for rides, trust became a luxury few could afford. And as disappearances mounted, dozens reported between 2006 and 2012, with police linking at least 7 to 8 through DNA and patterns, the question lingered: how many more were out there, never found? Valeriy Nikolaevich Andreev entered the world on April 10, 1957, in the tiny rural settlement of Shalkarsky, in the Svetlinsky district of Orenburg Oblast, deep in the Soviet Union, where life revolved around farms, harsh winters, and long stretches of empty steppe. Little is documented about his early years. No dramatic childhood stories surface in investigations or media reports. No tales of abuse, neglect, or anything that fits the textbook profile of a troubled origin. He grew up in a quiet village, finished local school around the mid-1970s, and, like so many young men in those remote regions, trained as a driver. It was a practical choice. Trucks needed moving, roads needed covering, and the pay kept families afloat. By adulthood, Andreev had relocated to Orsk, the larger nearby city, where he built what appeared to be a stable, respectable life. He married a woman named Tatiana, who worked as a nurse in a local hospital's surgical department. They raised 2 sons, one older, one younger, in a modest home. Colleagues and neighbors described him consistently: quiet, polite, reliable. A man who didn't drink heavily, didn't use drugs, never caused trouble. Over 15 years as a long-haul trucker, dalnoboyщик, he earned a spotless work record, just a handful of minor speeding tickets, 0 accidents. He was the kind of neighbor you waved to without a second thought, the kind of father who provided, the kind of husband who came home after long hauls. On the surface, ordinary. But something began to shift in the mid-2000s. Colleagues started noticing small changes. Andreev grew more withdrawn. He stopped accepting partners on runs, preferring to drive solo. No radio chatter. No shared shifts in the convoy. He limited conversations, kept to himself during breaks. Some described it as psychological discomfort, a quiet withdrawal from social contact that no one questioned too deeply at the time. In the isolation of the road, it was easy to disappear into your own thoughts. Then came the odd discoveries. After his shifts, other drivers sometimes found women's items left behind in the cab. Hairpins, clips, pieces of jewelry, articles of clothing, even condoms. At first, they joked about it. "Valeriy's been seeing someone on the side," they'd say, or assumed he used services along the route, common enough in long-haul life. No one pushed. No one reported. They looked away or laughed it off. Looking back, those were red flags in plain sight. Trophies? Souvenirs? Or simply forgotten by passengers? The truth only emerged years later when investigators connected the dots. Physically, he blended seamlessly into any crowd. About 173 centimeters tall, average build. Oval face, straight nose, short dark hair gradually turning gray with age. Thin lips, straight chin, ears close to the head. Nothing striking, except the gold dental crowns, 4 on the upper front teeth, several on the lower molars, and a faint surgical scar across his abdomen from an ulcer operation years earlier. Nothing about him screamed danger, nothing at all. That's what made him so effective at fading into the background, and what makes his story so unsettling. The man next door, the driver who offers a ride, the father who waves goodbye in the morning. The pattern revealed itself slowly, almost invisibly at first. Young women hitchhiking along the major arteries, the Orenburg-Chelyabinsk highway stretching east toward the Ural Mountains, the Samara-Orenburg route cutting north through steppe and forest, would spot a slowing vehicle. A truck cab, or more often a white foreign SUV. The driver, an older man in his mid-50s, calm expression, steady hands on the wheel. Where are you headed? It's no trouble to drop you off. A fatherly tone, honest eyes that inspired quick trust. In these rural stretches of post-Soviet Russia, where buses ran infrequently and winters could kill, a ride from someone who looked safe was rarely refused. They climbed in. The door closed behind them, and everything changed. Investigators later reconstructed a consistent method. He offered the lift with disarming politeness, then veered from the promised route. A quiet pullout in the forest belt, a deserted side road, or, in the most disturbing cases, directly to his own property on the outskirts of Orsk. Once isolated, the assaults began. Some attacks happened swiftly in the vehicle itself. Others were prolonged, drawn out over hours. Bodies were taken deep into the woods afterward, left exposed to rain, snow, animals, and the relentless passage of time. The vastness of the terrain did most of the work for him. Evidence vanished quickly. Scenes became unrecognizable after months or years. Forensics eventually linked him conclusively to at least 7 murders, with official sources citing 8 through DNA matches, phone data, and behavioral patterns. These were not impulsive acts. They followed a geographic signature, always near those highways, and a behavioral one, the exploitation of trust in a place where help was far away. One location emerged as central to the investigation: his garage in a quiet cooperative on the edge of Orsk. A plain concrete structure, like thousands across Russia, used by locals to store tools, old cars, winter tires. Neighbors later recalled a small but consistent detail. Andreev frequently repainted the interior walls with fresh whitewash, layer upon layer. At the time, it seemed like the habit of a meticulous man. No one thought twice about it. When police finally gained access, after he had already disappeared, they stripped back those layers. Beneath the plaster in the basement below the garage floor, traces of blood. Multiple foreign DNA profiles, matching victims who had vanished years earlier. Signs that some women had not been killed immediately. They had been held there, captive in that confined, windowless space, harmed over extended periods before being strangled and removed. Tools were found concealed in the area: knives, cord, blunt instruments. The walls had been painted repeatedly, perhaps to cover stains or simply to maintain control over the environment. The isolation was ideal. No immediate neighbors close enough to hear anything clearly. No one who reported unusual activity. Or perhaps no one wanted to listen too closely. This basement was not just a hiding place. It was a private extension of the highway trap, a place where the predator could take his time. DNA from 8 victims was eventually tied to that space, sealing the case file against him. But by the time those discoveries were made, Valeriy Andreev had vanished into the same endless roads he once ruled. The forests kept their secrets. The highways kept moving. And the question remained: how many more had followed that same path and never returned? The scale is staggering. Between 2006 and 2012, and potentially extending into later years, over 100 young women and girls vanished in the Orenburg region under strikingly similar circumstances. They were often last seen hitchhiking along those isolated highways, waiting for a ride that never brought them home safely. Police and investigators have long suspected that many of these disappearances connect to Valeriy Andreev. The geographic overlap, the consistent victim profile, young women in rural areas relying on strangers for transport, and the timing all point in the same direction. Yet concrete proof remains elusive for most. Only a fraction have been definitively linked through DNA, witness statements, or other forensic evidence. The rest linger as cold cases, unsolved mysteries buried in the vast forests and steppes, where time and weather erase traces that might have told the full story. This gap between suspicion and confirmation is one of the most haunting aspects of the case. In a region where missing persons reports were sometimes met with skepticism or delay, the true number may never be known with certainty. Authorities have confirmed his involvement in at least 7 murders, with some sources citing 8 based on DNA matches and patterns from the garage basement and his vehicles. But the shadow cast by those unsolved disappearances, over 100 reported missing in the targeted corridors, continues to fuel the belief that his trail of harm was far longer and more devastating than the evidence can fully prove. Summer 2012 became the turning point that finally brought Andreev into sharp focus. 18-year-old Olga Shurableva left her home in Pobeda, a quiet district on the outskirts of Orsk, to meet a friend. It was a warm evening, but public transport had already stopped running for the night. With no other options, she decided to hitchhike. She called her friend twice in quick succession, first to say there was no bus and she would flag down a car. Then, just minutes later, to report that she had gotten into one and was on her way. After that, nothing. Her phone went silent and was never turned on again. A local resident came forward days later with a crucial detail. She had seen a young woman matching Olga's description climb into a large white foreign SUV near a bus stop in the area. The witness didn't know car models well, but the description narrowed the search dramatically. In the entire Orsk region at that time, there were only about 11 such vehicles registered, and just 2 in the city itself. One of them belonged to Valeriy Andreev, a white SsangYong SUV. Police brought him in for questioning. He denied any involvement, claiming he had been at home or elsewhere that evening. With no immediate physical evidence to hold him, they released him. It was a decision that would later be heavily criticized as a major investigative failure. In the following days, investigators re-examined his vehicle more thoroughly. They found traces of blood that appeared to have been hastily cleaned. Cell phone data placed his device in the same area as Olga's at the time of her last call. Items in his truck and garage began to align with patterns from earlier disappearances. Days later, the investigation intensified. Police returned to Andreev's white SsangYong SUV with fresh scrutiny. Hidden beneath hasty attempts to clean the interior, they discovered traces of blood, small but unmistakable. Cell phone records placed his device in the exact area where Olga Zhuravleva's phone last pinged, just minutes after her final call to her friend. Forensic teams moved quickly. DNA samples recovered from the truck cab matched genetic profiles from several missing women whose cases had long gone cold. The evidence was mounting, irrefutable links to not just Olga, but a string of earlier disappearances. Authorities prepared to issue a warrant for his arrest once more. This time, they believed they had enough to hold him. Too late. The morning after that initial questioning, Andreev simply vanished. He left his home without a trace, no note, no goodbye to his family. His wife, Tatiana, later told investigators he had walked out the door and never returned. In one of his last known calls to her, his voice was calm but defiant. "Let them find the real killer first." Those words hung in the air like a challenge, or perhaps a final taunt.
The fallout was swift and national. Andreev was placed on Russia's federal wanted list almost immediately. By 2019, Interpol issued a full red notice, placing him at the top of their public appeals for crimes against women. The alert remains active to this day, a standing international request to law enforcement worldwide. Locate, detain, and extradite if found. A substantial reward was announced, 1 million rubles from Russia's Ministry of Internal Affairs, plus an additional 500,000 from the governor of Orenburg Oblast. In total, over 1.5 million rubles, roughly equivalent to 15,000 to 20,000 US dollars, for credible information leading to his capture. Sightings began flooding in from across the country: Krasnoyarsk in Siberia, St. Petersburg in the northwest, Kaliningrad on the Baltic coast, even quiet Moscow suburbs like Odintsovo. One report stood out. A university student on a public bus in 2022 spotted a man whose gold dental crowns caught the light, just as described in the wanted posters. She reported him immediately, but by the time police arrived, he was gone. Young mothers in various regions shared urgent warnings on social media and local chat groups. Photos of the APB flyers circulated widely, accompanied by stories of an older man approaching children or lingering too long near playgrounds. Each tip sparked hope, and each one faded into nothing. His ordinary appearance worked against the search. Average height, unremarkable features, nothing that stood out in a crowd. Investigators believed he could be using forged documents, perhaps living under a new identity in a remote corner of Siberia, or slipping across the border into neighboring Kazakhstan. Or perhaps he was no longer alive at all. In mid-2025, a decomposed male body was discovered near a small lake in Orenburg Oblast, close to the Russia-Kazakhstan border, in the same region where his crimes had unfolded. The remains had distinctive gold teeth, matching Andreev's known dental work. Clothing and build aligned with descriptions. Forensic artists produced photo robots that locals swore looked exactly like him. Media outlets erupted. Headlines screamed, "Could this be the end of the Orsk Maniac?" Russian news channels and international outlets like The Mirror and The Sun covered the discovery extensively, speculating that the long hunt might finally be over. But DNA testing told a different story. The results came back negative, no match to Andreev. The body belonged to someone else. The brief wave of hope receded, leaving the case as open as ever. As of early 2026, Valeriy Andreev remains firmly on Russia's updated list of the top 11 to 12 most dangerous fugitives, as confirmed by the Ministry of Internal Affairs. His Interpol red notice is still active, with no expiration or resolution noted. The search continues, quietly, relentlessly, across a country of vast distances and countless hiding places. Whether he is still drawing breath, hiding in plain sight, or has already met an unmarked end, the highways of Orenburg Oblast stretch on in silence, holding their secrets close. Valeriy Andreev would be 68 or 69 years old now.
if he is still drawing breath. A man who once moved freely along Russia's vast network of highways, endless ribbons of asphalt cutting through steppe, forest and snow, has become something almost spectral, a chameleon in plain sight, blending into crowds of ordinary faces, ordinary lives. His unremarkable appearance, once his greatest asset, now serves as both shield and curse in any ongoing search. Did he slip away quietly years ago, perhaps in some remote village, perhaps from natural causes, and find an unmarked grave under the same indifferent sky that once covered his crimes? Or is he still out there, somewhere among the millions, living under a borrowed name, watching the world from the edges of bus stops, train platforms, or quiet suburban streets? Has time, the slow erosion of age, the weight of decades on the run, or perhaps the quiet gnaw of guilt, finally caught up to him in ways no investigator ever could? We may never know the answer. The case files remain open. The Interpol Red Notice still circulates. The reward posters, though faded in some places, hang in police stations and post offices across Russia. But the highways of Orenburg Oblast stretch on unchanged. The same lonely stretches where young women once waited for rides. The same dense forest belts that swallowed evidence and secrets alike. The same endless horizon that promises both escape and isolation. Somewhere along those roads, or perhaps far beyond them, the truth waits. It waits in unmarked earth, in forgotten memories, in the silence of those who might have seen something but never spoke. It waits for a single mistake, a careless sighting, a tip from someone who recognizes those gold teeth, or that quiet, fatherly voice in a crowd. Until that moment comes, if it ever does, the Orsk Maniac remains a ghost story told in whispers, a reminder that some predators do not roar. They simply fade into the ordinary, and the ordinary world keeps moving forward, carrying its unanswered questions with it. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, hit the like button, and share for more raw global cases.